later on. Or Bill, maybe you can help me out. We'll figure that out later on. Okay, so anyway, like I mentioned before, this is the first of 4 study sessions. They're going to be held Thursday evenings. The next ones will be on the 15th, 22nd, and 29th, all at 7 o'clock. The login codes and everything that you use for tonight's meeting should work on the subsequent ones. The way that the study sessions will work, and I realize that for this first one here, folks probably really, well, we'll get to that. We'll see if you do have any questions. The first thing we want to do is address any questions you might have about your studies. But tonight, we'll also entertain any questions you have about ham radio in general. If you're curious about things like, handheld radios, if you're curious about satellite communications, we can talk about that for a little bit. Then what we will do is jump into our Gordon West training materials. And the primary study guide for this course is the Gordon West Tech Training Manual. For those of you who logged in a little bit early, you heard me talking about them. I finally was able to order 5 of these from the ARRL, and they only took a few days to get here. That was good news. I will try to order more of them later on, but this is a good study guide to use for this course here. There is also the ARRL, and some of you may already have this, their ham radio guide, and it looks like this one right here. Both of them are excellent resources and should be able to answer any questions that you have. Now, in some of my emails earlier, I did send a link to the No Nonsense Study Guide for Technician. If you do have a background in electronics, that might be all you need. So go ahead and take a look at that. If that is scratching the itch for you, if you think that's enough for you, then by all means, maybe at least hold off on perhaps purchasing one of these manuals. They do cost about 30 bucks. And I do want to hold on to a couple of these that I got for our instructors because we'll need them as a reference. But I will have a couple left over if anybody is interested in getting them. The only catch is that I'm probably going to have to ask that you come to me in order to drop them off because I am working. And as a matter of fact, I am going to be out of town all next week. We'll have a couple of them. And if there is a lot of interest, I will order more of them, probably from Ham Radio Outlook, because I get a break on the shipping if we get them through them. But at any rate, once again, these are 2 excellent study guides to use for this course. These will get you through it. Now, I've also got a little bit of good news about the fact that you all are joining us tonight, and especially if you can stick with us, you are going to have a huge leg up going into CramFest. If you can already get into some studies, attend these study sessions, ask questions, hear the things that we're talking about. I think you'll find that CramFest is a heck of a lot easier. As a matter of fact, I'm sure there'll be lots of parts of it where you're just going, oh my gosh, I know all this stuff already. And that would be a wonderful thing. But again, good on all of you for being here tonight. It's going to give you a great advantage. But at any rate, our Gordon West topics for tonight are about ham radio. We're going to talk about call signs, controlling a ham station, minding the rules, technician frequencies, your first radio, and going solo. So tonight is going to be a lot of sort of like procedural type things. These are kind of the things that you just got to kind of know, some memorization. We're not getting really technical at this stage of it. But we'll go through those things. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to chime in. Okay, just a little bit about CramFest. As I mentioned before, CramFest will be March 8th, 9th, and 10th. We're going to start Friday evening. It'll run from 6 to 9, all day Saturday, pretty much from 9 to 5, and then Sunday morning from about 9 to noon. We'll take a break for lunch till about 1 o'clock, and then we'll have our exam session, and that'll run from about 1 to 3, or as long as you need to complete your test. That'll be in the basement of St. John's Church on 141 South Potomac Street, and I do have a map that I'll show you that in a moment. We had a discussion about providing food at CramFest at our last meeting, and we're not going to be doing that. We will have some, for instance, light refreshments and some water and coffee and everything. But it's just going to be too complicated. And we're not, obviously, we're not going to be sure of how many people we have there at any given time. So we do ask that maybe you bring something for lunch, maybe pack a sandwich. We will have a cooler there to keep anything cold that you might want to have. And like I said, coffee, water, and some snacks. There'll probably be some donuts there, stuff like that for you. Our basis for the CramFest will be the instructional slides that we're going to start showing you tonight. There are 600 of these slides total that we need to get through CramFest, which means that we only have about 1 minute per slide. So again, the fact that you're getting a head start on your studies is really going to be valuable for you, because CramFest is going to be very fast paced. So anyway, this is just a bird's eye view of St. John's Church. There are parking lots. This is Potomac Ave, for those of you familiar with downtown Hagerstown. There's a parking lot on the northeast side and one on the southwest side where you can park in. And the entrance that we go in is right over here in the northeast corner of the building. And you just go in that door, make a hard right, go down to the basement. We will, of course, be providing more detailed information about CramFest, including, where to park, all that neat stuff in the coming weeks. By the way, that is also where we hold our Antietam Radio Association meetings. We just had one of those this past Tuesday. We have them typically the first and third Tuesdays of the month. And you are, of course, welcome to come join us at those as well. So anyway, after all this stuff is done, after CramFest is done, hopefully you're all done. You got your technician class license. I got my license. Now what? Well, the Antietam Radio Association is going to continue to provide mentorship through folks like Bill, Steve, myself, and several other members of our group. We'll give you coaching and assist you with setting up your first ham station. And we also host radio networks, which is going to be a great way for you to get practice. We have a term in ham radio. It's called mic fright. And that is a reluctance to get on the radio. You don't know who you're talking to. You're afraid you might say something incorrect. It's a very, very common thing. And getting on these networks will really help you out a lot. There's also an expression for a similar thing when you're doing Morse code. It's called key flee. And in perhaps, in the future, Steve can tell us all about that. But that's true also. It's the reluctance to get on there doing Morse code for fear of making a mistake. And it's like anything else. It's like riding a bike, learning a sport, playing a musical instrument. The way that you get through it is through practice. But anyway, we've got 3 networks that I want to tell you about. One is our 4 States FM net. That is Wednesdays at 8 p.m. and that's hosted by Steve. We also have a net that happens on 6-meter single sideband. Now, not all of you will have a capability probably for that as you first get your license, but eventually you may want to get on it. It's a lot of fun, and they meet Wednesdays at 9, right after the 4 States net. We also have a 10-meter net, which we have not run in a while. And the significance of that 10-meter net is that is a great place for technicians to get on the air and practice operating. And our game plan is that after CramFest, if there is some interest, especially amongst folks like yourselves, of having that network so you can get on the air, talk on the radio, make mistakes, have fun, all that kind of stuff, we'll get that network going, and that's a great way to practice. Now, earlier, let's see, I want to say it was Walt who was interested in emergency communications. Actually, I hope you all are, because that's an important aspect of ham radio. It's a service we provide to the community. It's something we're very proud of. And I'll tell you what, it's also a lot of fun. It's a neat thing to get into. We do engage in 2 big exercises every year, and one of them is ARRL, that's the American Radio Relay League Field Day. And this year that will be held on the 22nd and 23rd of June. That's a Saturday and Sunday. This is the Super Bowl of ham radio contests. This is the big one. There are thousands of stations all across the country and all over the world that participate in it. And we will set up stations out at Leitersburg Ruritan Park. We're going to set up a bunch of stations there. We're going to run off generators. We're going to set up antennas, and we're going to try to talk to as many stations as we can. During the course of Field Day, I predict that we will communicate with well in excess of 600 stations during the course of that weekend. And we hope, again, you being all new technicians, relatively new technicians at that time, that you come out and join us, have a lot of fun getting on the radio and getting a lot of experience. This is terrific emergency communications practice. We're probably going to have about 5 or 6 stations going there. We're going to have CW, which is Morse code. Steve's one of our great gurus for that. We'll have a lot of phone stations on single sideband, and we'll also be doing digital communications. Digital communications is absolutely huge in ham radio right now. I'm really getting into that, as a matter of fact, and we'll talk more about that in the future, but we'll also have stations there that are doing that, and it's a great way to get trained in it and learn more. We are also investigating the idea of having a practice session prior to field day, and that may come in the form of an event called Parks on the Air. That is a very popular thing in ham radio nowadays, where ham radio operators go out to things like state and national parks and set up a ham radio station. And once they get it going, they try to contact as many stations as they can. This will be a great warm-up exercise for field day. I'm hoping to hold this a couple of weeks prior. The details are still very much in work, but stay tuned. We'll let you know when that kind of event happens. And for all of you, that will be, again, terrific practice. So anyway, that's pretty much the slides I wanted to talk about. I do have a bunch of slides in here related to different aspects of ham radio, but it would take quite a while to go through all of them. So I want to open up the floor before we get started on our actual curriculum tonight. Does anybody have any questions about ham radio, any aspect of it, you know, something you maybe heard about and curious about? And we can take a few minutes and tell you a little bit about it.
I have a question about the group.
I'm sorry, Mark. You're. I know your voice is very hoarse. You said something about the group.
Yeah, like, is there a Hagerstown ham radio group or a Washington County group that you all belong to?
Oh yeah.
Like a chapter or something?
You betcha. You know, I was showing you that slide. Yeah, we are the Antietam Radio Association. Boy, maybe I should have led off with that. We are a club. It's been here in Hagerstown for a very long time. I want to say it dates back to, gosh, Steve can probably correct me on this. I think it dates back to like the 30s or 40s.
53, Joe.
53. Okay, 53. Good long time. And we are a very active club. And like I said, you know, I was talking about that field day stuff. That is our club. You know, we get together, we go out there, set up these radios. We typically have 2 meetings a month. We have a business meeting the first Tuesday of the month, and that's at St. John's Church. Let me flip back to there real quick. And we meet in the basement of St. John's Church, and we cover, you know, a club business and things of that sort. On the third Tuesday of the month, we have an activities meeting, and Steve is the focal point for that. And that's when we talk about these events that we're doing. The last big event that we did was Winter Field Day. That took place at the end of January. And actually our big event now going forward is this training. It is CramFest. Steve is also keeping us on our toes about a huge ham radio flea market that we hold every year. And I'll tell you what, I'll let Steve come off mute in a moment and maybe tell you all about that. But also another big event, obviously coming up at the end of June, will be the ARRL Field Day, and we'll be participating in that. And by the way, you'll hear us refer to the ARRL. That is the American Radio Relay League, and that is the largest ham radio association in the world. That's the big national one. They do a lot of great things for ham radio. They lobby for us. They provide training materials. Like I said, that was the place that I ordered our manuals from. And I will send out some slides later on. To get to their website, you just go to arrl.org, and you'll find all types of great information on there about ham radio. But I'll tell you what, did that answer your question there, Mark?
Yes, sir.
Okay, wonderful. Hey, Steve, do you want to make a little bit of a plug for HamFest at all?
Yes. I am the activities director for the Antietam Radio Association, and we have several events coming up, and I have the emails of everybody that's signed up here, so I'll send you notice of these events. The first event that's coming up, like right now, is we have a winter dinner. this the second meeting of each month, we start out at the American Legion on Northern Avenue. And that's a great place to go. It's very reasonable food and drink. And so we, from 5 until 6:30, we're at the Legion. And then we drive over to St. John's for the meeting. That happens the third Tuesday of every month. Now, this month we have a winter dinner, Saturday, February 24th. It's $20 a plate, and it would be a good chance to come and get to know some of the members. Also, then on May 4th, Saturday, May 4th, we have a ham fest, which is a flea market, basically, where hams come and buy and sell equipment. And we have speakers there, and we have food there, and it's a jolly good time. We've been doing it every year since I don't know when, but this one is going to be up in Morgansville. And again, I will put all of you on the broadcast list so that you will get information, and nobody's going to twist your arm. You're welcome to participate as much as is comfortable for you, but we'd love to see you. The great thing about ham fests is hams are notorious gadgeteers, and I have a collection of equipment that goes back to 1962. And at a ham fest, you can usually find anything. If you there's no reason to buy gadgets new, because most of us are we like to collect stuff.
We're pack rats.
Yeah, that's about it. But the thing is, it's wrong to throw that stuff out. There's some real artisanship that went into that, and so I told my wife, when I leave this life, give it away if you have to, but for goodness sake, don't junk it, because there's an awful lot of good stuff, and I have a garage full. Anyway, that's the Ham Fest, and it's good to go there and just get the feel of it and chat with people and hear presenters and stuff like that. So that's all.
Okay. Wonderful, Steve. Thanks. Okay, before we jump into our actual coursework for tonight, any other questions, comments, anything at all? Okay, here we go. Slide package number 1. This is the technician class license course. And our first element out of the Gordon West courseware is about ham radio. And by the way, for everybody on the call, like I mentioned, these are the same slides that you're going to see in HamFest. Now, we're going to go through the narrative portion, the instructional portion of it, but also in the back, when we get to CramFest, we're also going to throw up a lot of questions at you. We're going to have slides that just have questions. These are verbatim questions out of the from the FCC of what you will be tested on for your technician class license. So a cool thing about what we're doing right now, when you answer questions or when you take practice exams or something like that, that is exactly the question that you're going to see when you go to take your license. So, truthfully, if you've got a really good memory, you could go through these things and quite literally just memorize enough questions to pass the exam. But the great thing that you folks are doing right now is that I think you'll have a much deeper understanding through the talks that we have here. So again, first topic about ham radio. And let's talk about the FCC. The Federal Communications Commission, you probably all heard about that, makes and enforces all amateur radio rules in the United States. Now, on this bullet here, something I do want to point out to you is you will often see these references when we talk about material in this courseware. It says T1A02, and that is a reference to the section, the technical section within the FCC license curriculum, if you will, that this question refers to. And for instance, I'm going to bear with me for just a moment. If you have something like the ARRL ham radio license manual. And the back of it are all of those test questions that I was talking about, every last one. And you could come in here quite literally and say, okay, this is T1A02. So I'm going to go to this in my manual here. And this is one neat thing about the way these tests are set up right now. I'm going to go to the question related to T1A02. And the question reads, which agency regulates and enforces the rules for amateur radio service in the United States? There you go. And the answer is the FCC. But the great news is, once again, as we go through this curriculum and everything, you know, as you see bullets and everything, they correlate directly to a question, which is really helpful. As a matter of fact, when you get closer to CramFest, something that we're going to encourage you to do is just go and take practice exams. You know, just really hit on those things and make sure that, you know, you see as many of these questions as you possibly can and are familiar with the answer. So anyway, you already know the answer to one question on the exam. And by the way, there are 35 questions in the technician exam. Okay. Advancing skills in the technical and communication phases of the radio art is part of the basis and purpose of the amateur radio service. Long time ago, when the FCC started amateur radio, this is what they were trying to do. What they wanted to do was amongst our nation, have a greater pool of individuals that were savvy with communications and could also operate these radios. And that was a huge driving force. And once again, just like it was in the previous question there, that is related to a section in the exam, T1A01. There are a couple of neat slides in here right now. These here are people doing something called a fox hunt. And fox hunting is something that you'll often hear about at ham radio events. There may even be one at our ham fest that Steve was talking about. And that's where you go and you hide a small radio transmitter. Like in this case here, it looks like they're operating out of an airport. You can do it out in a field or anything like that. And using these small directional antennas and these receivers, you literally go out and try to find them. Kids really like that too. Okay, the FCC issues only 3 classes of ham licenses. When Steve and I first got licensed, there were actually 5. But there are the technician, the general, and the amateur extra. The technician is the entry-level exam. That's the one you're going for right here. And it provides a great deal of capability on the VHF and UHF bands. You're somewhat restricted on the shortwave ones. As a matter of fact, a lot of you, once you sort of get into this a little bit, you may be kind of itching to get your general because it does open up a lot of doors to you. But there is a lot you can do with the technician license. And like we said, even once you get licensed, the Antietam Radio Association members will help you out and get you started on your way, you know, help you setting up a station, things of that sort. After the technician, like I mentioned, is the general. And then after that is the amateur extra. The amateur extra is a very, very comprehensive exam. And once you get to amateur extra, you have privileges and you can operate on all the ham radio bands that there are. That's kind of how these things get broken up. As you go up in the licenses you have, the more privileges you get in ham radio. After passing your examination for your license, as soon as your operator station license grant appears in the FCC ULS database, you can get on the air. Now, what that all means is that one of the things that we're going to talk to you about, it's not important for today, but in the next couple of weeks, is that you need to go in and open up an account on the FCC's ULS system. And what that will do is that's going to be the place where you go in and see your official license, things of that sort. You can download copies of it, but it is the official repository, if you will, for the information regarding your license. And it doesn't cost anything. It's pretty easy to go in and log on and get that done. But that is something you're going to need to do before you go to take your license exam. So we'll if you will, we'll bug you about that in the coming weeks to make sure that you go to the FCC website and get that done. but it's absolutely essential that you get that done before the CramFest weekend. When your control operator's primary station license appears in the FCC ULS, you have your proof of possession of an FCC operator license grant. Now, that kind of was a lot of words to just basically say, yeah, once again, once you're in the FCC ULS, you have proof of possession of that FCC license. I think that that is kind of a complicated way of saying the same thing. Now, they do bring up a couple of terms in this question, though, and one is the concept of the control operator. When you get your license, it's actually two pieces. It is a control operator's license, and it is also a station license. So when you get your FCC license, it'll have your home address on it. That's where the FCC assumes your home station is. But it's also a grant for you. It's just like a driver's license that you can go out and do ham radio. That is an important distinction, and we're going to get into that in just a slide or two, because the rules affecting both of those aspects of ham radio are kind of important, and you will see things about them on the exam. Oh, by the way, here's what that universal licensing system, the FCC webpage, looks like here. I'm going to send out slides. I'll get them posted to our website and send them out to you all. And it will also have links to take you to this site so that you can go in and register on it. Once again, it's 100% free. You just have to go in and get that stuff done so that your license information can show up on the universal licensing system. Okay, only one operator primary station license grant may be held by any person. Yep, you only get one ham radio license. And that license, like I mentioned before, will grant you the privileges to be a control operator of a ham radio station. And it will also be your station license. It will designate, in most cases, your home as the place where your primary station is. The normal term for an FCC amateur radio license is 10 years. So you have a long time to forget that you need to renew your license. So anyway, it will stay in there for a long time. And the good news is that you do not have to take another exam. Let's say, for instance, you take your technician exam and you don't upgrade to, say, general or anything like that, and just stay at a technician. It doesn't cost you anything to go in and renew it. And you only have to renew it once every 10 years. Now, let's say if you're like me and one time you forget to renew your license, which I did back in the early 1990s. Luckily, I was only about 6 months into the period after my license expired. There is a 2-year grace period for you to go in and renew it if, in fact, you're like me and you forget that one time. However, once your license expires, you cannot operate. So, like, for instance, it is now, you're going to hopefully have your licenses in March of 2024. In March of 2023, if you don't renew it, you do have to stop, but you've got 2 full years to go and 2-year grace period to go and renew it again. If your license has expired and is within the grace period, oh, well, I got ahead of myself there. You may not translate until your FCC ULS shows renewal. So again, that's the thing, that once your license expires, you cannot operate until you get it renewed again. And believe it or not, these may sound a little bit mundane, and it's good that we're getting through them and everything, but you will see these questions on the exam. The good news is a lot of them just sort of make sense. They're not overpowering, and they're fairly logical. Before I move on to the next slide, though, I've gone through a few slides. Does anybody have any questions on anything I've covered so far?
The license is good for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming it can be revoked.
You really have to go out of your way to get your ham radio license revoked. It does happen. If you do things like willfully interfere with the operation of other stations, if you, there are P's and Q's of operating in ham radio, and most of them is the rules of polite conversation.
Right.
You keep your language clean and things of that sort.
Sure.
It's really an extreme situation, but it does happen occasionally. Somebody out there thinks they own the airwaves, and they
Comes a big
broadcast
ring.
on top
Yeah.
of other stations. And what comes around goes around. You know, the FCC occasionally does catch up with those folks, but it is exceedingly rare.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, yeah. And also one thing I want to emphasize to everybody: making simple mistakes. Hey, we're amateurs. This is amateur radio. If we were professional radio operators, we'd call this prime rib or filet mignon radio. But no, it's ham radio. You're going to get on the air. You're going to make mistakes. Don't worry about it. You know, we always try to be better and everything like that. But
Sure.
you know, it's not like the FCC goes issuing, you know, speeding tickets every time you use the wrong phonetics or you mess up your Morse code. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
Can I make a comment, Joe?
Certainly. Go ahead, Steve.
The ARRL also has a volunteer monitor service where hams listen on the bands, and if they hear a station operating outside the rules, they'll send them a notice and tell them why. And one of our club members, Riley Hollingsworth, is a guy that's leading that up. So I just wanted to mention that, the volunteer monitoring service.
Yeah, that's good. And we are for the most part a very self-policing organization. I mean, we're people that love what we do. We you know, we want more people to be in it. This is a very much a community, and we all want to enjoy it. So you know, like Steve was mentioning there, that's a really good thing. But a lot of times things can be handled just politely. You know, accidentally stations do try to tune up on the same frequency. And most of the time we just say, you know, we just move off the frequency a little bit so we're not interfering with anybody else, and everybody goes home happy.
Right.
Hey,
Okay.
hey Joe, I did have a question.
Sure.
Is there a reason why the bans are so restrictive to certain groups? Is there some kind of danger or damage that can be done? Like instead
No,
of just opening all the frequencies up to a licensed person.
Yeah. The idea behind it is that the more that you learn about ham radio, the more that your technical knowledge increases, the more privileges you are bestowed. Now, the FCC does have their hands tied a little bit. There is an international, I believe it's the International Telecommunications Union, which the United States does subscribe to, which does establish left and right boundaries for ham radio operations. Now, just Joe McGuire talking, I do wish the technician license had a bit more operating band segments, especially on, like, for instance, 40 meters, maybe even something on 20 meters. And the reason being is because there's a lot of activity there, and it'd be a great way to get practice. But some of them are based on restrictions of that. But there is a philosophy also in ham radio licensing, is that the more you learn about the hobby, the more privileges they give you as you go along. And back in the day, back when Steve and I were first licensed, you also had to know Morse code. And to get a higher ranked license, you had to be able to copy Morse code at a faster speed. You know, you went from about 5 words per minute as a novice up to 13 as a general. And I believe for the amateur extra, it was 20. You no longer need to know Morse code in ham radio. That answer your question, Mark?
Yes, sir. And you did mention briefly about professional radio. Is that what we commonly refer to as commercial radio stations?
Yeah,
Like-
that would be commercial, and that's
Okay.
like your professional. Oh gosh, I should know the name of it. There is a, you know, professional telecommunications licenses and things like that. That, like, for instance, people that work in broadcast radio or who operate satellite type communications have to have. And yeah, that is very much for people that do that as a profession. For the most part, we will talk about some exceptions. In ham radio, you can't make money operating in ham radio for the most part. There are a couple of caveats to that, but for the most part, it's accepted that, you know, everything that we do is gratis, and we don't get paid for it. Okay. All right. I'll tell you what, that concludes the first section of slides that I have. Steve, are you ready to go?
Yes, let me get queued up here.
Okay. Let me escape out of my slides and let me.
I cannot share while you are sharing, Joe.
Yeah, let me go figure out how I turn that off. Let's see. New share, pause share, stop. No, don't want to stop recording. And
Looks
yes.
like you did it.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, you got it, Steve.
Now let's see here. Okay, can everybody see this?
Not quite yet.
Oh, good. Well, for Pete's sake, I said share screen. Let me see. Now I've got call signs up on my screen. Can you see that yet? Oh, select the application I want to share. Okay, this.
Yeah.
Now can you see that?
Negative.
No, not yet, Steve.
Oh, good. I'm going
Yeah,
in.
I'm not convinced that I've stopped sharing. Does everybody still see my slides?
No.
No.
Oh,
Just your,
Okay, good. And I'm out. Okay.
let me go back to not sharing. Let's see. Now I will share screen again. I want to share this. And
Okay, there you go,
There
Steve.
you go.
okay, good.
There
All
we
right.
go.
got it.
Good job, Steve.
Yeah, let's see. Now now it says participants can see. Now I got to get everybody off to one side. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about call signs. Is this showing up full screen?
No, it's showing your menus around it, but we can read it okay if you just want to go that route, Steve.
How's that? Is that full screen now?
That's a little bit bigger. Can still see the
Okay.
menu on top, but it's definitely bigger.
Okay,
Yeah.
we're going to talk about call signs. The stations are identified by an alphanumeric. It's called a call sign. The first letter in the call sign usually identifies the country. We'll get more to that in a second here. There we go. So we're going to talk about call signs. Your call signs, which we'll get to, the first letter tells you what country. For the USA, all of our call signs begin with either W, K, N, or A. And then there's a digit that tells you what part of the country your license was originally issued in. Now, I think the next one here, the call sign is your identifier. It's your name on the air. We don't use, handles as in CB really. Yes, we give our names, but the way you identify your station is with your call sign. Now, first, when you are transmitting, you have to identify at the end of your transmission and every 10 minutes during your transmission. You don't have to identify at the beginning. It's a good idea. See up here, the start of, so I wonder what this does. Whoop. Okay, don't want to do that. You should identify at the start, though it's not required. And there is a question about that too. You don't have to identify at the start, but you ought to. Most hams do. However, if you transmit longer than 10 minutes, every 10 minutes, you have to say this is WA80IH or whoever, your call sign, and always at the end. So again, for transmissions longer than 10 minutes, you identify every 10 minutes and at the end. If the transmission is less than 10 minutes, you just identify at the end of the transmission. And it's best to identify at the beginning, but you don't have to. Now, this is kind of like a driver's license test. Yeah, these are just rules, but they do make sense, like Joe said. Now, hams can also use the ham bands for controlling radio-controlled cars, boats, or aircraft. And in fact, the ham frequencies are a little less crowded if you go to a model airplane meet. But you don't identify during those if you're controlling model aircraft. But all other transmissions you must identify. So again, there are questions about this. You don't have to identify for radio control. However, all other cases you must. And you identify every 10 minutes and the end. And if you're talking less than 10 minutes, you just identify at the end. By the way, if there's any questions, somebody just chirp up and say, hey, wait a minute, but are there any questions over this?
And just FYI, everybody, I put all the students on mute. We had a little bit of background noise there, so I apologize for putting you on mute. But if you want to come off to ask any of us a question, please do so.
Okay. Dang it, the arrow key doesn't work. I got to use this.
Steve, you might also want to press F5 to actually turn the view mode on.
I beg your pardon?
You may want to press F5 to
F5. Doesn't work on my machine. F5. Oh, okay.
and then your arrow key and your enter key should work.
Oh, okay. Now, for a call sign, at least 4 persons are required to be a member of a club. If a club can be issued a station license as well. So you will always have your individual license, but the club can be issued a license, but it takes 4 people to make a club. So for example, W3CWC is the call sign for the Antietam Radio Association. But as part of that, I am WA80IH. So thank you, Bill, by the way, for helping me here. Now, sometimes you use a tactical call sign, like meaning that if we are helping out, say, with a foot race or something, or a marathon, we can say this is, this is location 4, or this is net control for the JFK. So you can use tactical call signs, but in any case, you must always transmit your FCC assigned call sign at the end of the communication. And every 10 minutes during. Now, it says, oh, good. I just rolled that up there. English. English is the acceptable, it says an acceptable language for station identification when you operate on phone. When you operate digital or CW, you send a code for the letter. But when in phone, you identify in English. Now it says an acceptable language, but I noticed the question is phrased more like the acceptable language. And as a reminder, remember that on the aeronautic bands, English is the lingua franca, is the language that is used in aeronautics. Is that not right, Joe?
Yeah, that is correct. English is the international language for air travel.
All right. So this this is the question here. In fact, let me check. Let me see. Let me check that. Just take just a second. T1F04, because I noticed that and I thought, hey, that's not good. T1F04 says, what language may you use for identification when operating? And it says, any language recognized by the United Nations, any language recognized by the ITU, English, or English, French, or Spanish. and the right answer is English. So just make like that you must use it, okay? Now, what the heck? Now I'm using the arrows and this thing is repeating. We said this.
Mhm. Okay, that's new.
Okay. A vanity call sign, you can request like your initials or I worked at a NASA center in Cleveland and their club station call sign is NA8SA, NASA. That's a vanity call sign. There's lots of guys that will have their initials or whatever. But the
You're right.
you see that the station or the call sign begins with either a K, a W, an A, or an N. And then afterward, somewhere in there, there's a number that indicates the call letter. We'll get to this, but what FCC district. And then the rest of it, you can, if you pay $25, the call sign is not being used, the FCC will grant you a call sign. In Morse code, sometimes we request a call sign that sounds good on Morse code. It's easy to send and whatnot. Any questions? Okay, let's see. Let's talk about the phonetic alphabet. This is the international ICAO, I guess it is. But this, oh man. Oh, please. I'm sorry. I used the roller on my.
You should be able to use a left arrow to go backwards a little bit there, Steve.
All right.
I say should, so.
Here we go. The phonetic alphabet is encouraged. Now, you should really learn these. You guys, several of us were in the military. I was in the nuclear Navy, and this is the language you use in the military. So this will sound quite familiar to you. But because as you know, sometimes if the channel is noisy, you can't hear A, but you can hear alpha, or you can't hear Q, but you can hear Quebec. So this is encouraged by the FCC. Try not to use goofy call signs. Try to stick to these, but sometimes people will make up funny phonetics for their call sign. There's no law against that, by the way. Now, your call sign, sometimes if you are operating away from your normal location, you'll put a / after your call sign, or if you're portable or something like that. So stroke, slant, or /, those are self-assigned indicators that you can use on phone transmissions. Like this is WA8EIH/portable4, something like that. Now it turns out the number in your call sign doesn't always, it refers to where your station was issued, but sometimes people will move and they'll take their call sign with them. But I don't want to get too deep in that. But the point is, if you want to, if you are operating in not a usual circumstance, you can say WA8EIH/portable, or slant portable, or / portable. Now, here are the districts. The 0, WZ, there's 0 through 9. 0 is in the upper Midwest. 1 is in New England. 2 is New York, New Jersey. 3 is Delaware, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, and so forth. My call sign, WA8EIH, I was licensed in Northeast Ohio. And at that time, I was assigned the call sign WA8EIH. Actually, it was WN8EIH. And then I advanced to a higher grade license. It became WA8EIH, but the H persisted. And I've moved all over the country, but I kept my call sign. So now I live in the 3rd call district, but it's okay to say WA8EIH, and I don't have to say /8 either. But the number in your call letters will refer, you're living in the 3rd call district, and so your letters will probably be KC3 something or other, okay? And whereas if you were in Texas, you'd be, KC5 something or other when you first get your license. And there's an engineer in charge of each FCC district, and they take care of the hams in their particular district. So there used to be a one-to-one correspondence between your call sign and where you were. And you used to be required, I used to be required when I was in the Navy in California, I was WA8EIH/6. And I had to write a letter to the FCC engineer in charge. But that's not required anymore. So the number in your call sign just refers to where the license was issued. Any questions? Oh, and by the way, that's for the continental U.S. Alaska, the prefix is KL7. Hawaii, KH6. Puerto Rico, by the way, is KP4. But as there's more and more hams, there's some variation on these as well. But these are the prefixes for Alaska and Hawaii. But your testing and stuff will just concern the continental U.S. Look at those questions because it's very much like, excuse me, the rules on a driver's license test. Now, in the world, the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, there are three regions. We are in ITU Region 2. Any country whose administration notifies the ITU that they object to communications with FCC licensed stations results in prohibitions for exchanging communications. I think that we are not allowed to communicate with, I think, North Korea, stations like that. But there are stations or the countries that say, hey, we don't want amateur stations from this particular country to communicate with our hams. So you got to pay attention to that. Again, any country whose administration notifies the ITU that they object to communications with FCC licensed amateur stations results in prohibition from exchanging communications. Now, what kind of communications are allowed in the international amateur service? Communications incidental to the purposes of the amateur service and remarks of a personal character are the kinds of international communications that are permitted by FCC stations, FCC licensed stations. A lot of things are covered to incidental to the purposes of the amateur service, but there's some stuff you cannot do, which we will get to. Like, for example, you may not broadcast music. You may not do commercial broadcasting for your ham station. It's part of the amateur part of it. Anyway, another point here. A message from a control operator to another amateur station control operator on behalf of someone else is third-party communications. The control operator is a person to whom the license is issued. And if you have a neighbor who has a relative in China and they would like you to send a message to a station in China for a relative there. That's called third-party communications. So normally communications are only between licensed control operators. However, if you're passing messages for someone else, that's third-party traffic or third-party communications. And here's all of the call signs, the permissible countries that we can talk to. Let's see. Right now, I don't see any that are not permissible, but HM and HL looks like that's the Korean Peninsula there. Are there any questions at this point, by the way? Okay. Again, see here in the United States, our call signs begin with A, K, N, and W. Canadian call signs begin with V, VE, VO, VA, and such. Puerto Rico down here, well, they don't have that, but KP4 is Puerto Rico, by the way. Here's an example of a woman talking to relatives overseas via amateur radio. That's an example of third-party traffic. There was a lot of that done during the Vietnam War by the MARS network, the military affiliate radio system, where family members in the U.S. by shortwave radio, by ham radio, would talk to their relatives in Vietnam.
Steve,
Yes.
just out of curiosity, what about American territories? Do they start with the same letters as the US, or are they their own letters?
They
Like
they
Guam.
start with the same letters. Like Puerto Rico is KP4, you know, Hawaii is KH6, Alaska is KL7, and in the Pacific, it's always K, N, or W. So the first letter, yes, Gretchen, that is correct.
All right, that's what I was curious about.
The first letter is always N, K, W, or A for a U.S. possession. Let's see. I think part of Bermuda belongs to the U.S. Maybe I'm wrong there, but again, what you said is correct. Now, for a non-licensed, did that answer your question, Gretchen?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, good. I don't want to get off on a track here, but you can look up the international prefixes of radio stations. And if you hear the call letters of a station, you can look at the list of international prefixes and you can see where that station is located. So that's, for example, somebody somewhere, if they hear my call sign beginning with a W, they can look that up and say, ha, he's in the US somewhere. All right. Now, for a non-licensed person to speak to a foreign station under the control of a licensed amateur radio operator, the foreign station must be a country with which the U.S. has a third-party agreement. So the USA has to have a third-party agreement with another nation before a non-licensed person, like the lady we saw in the picture, can speak over the radio to someone there. So that's third party traffic. There's got to be a third party agreement, and I think there are third party agreements for most of the countries in the world, but not all of them. Not all of them. Now, FCC licensed stations, amateur stations, you can transmit from any vessel or craft in international waters that's documented or registered in the United States. So if you're on a yacht and you're beyond the 3-mile limit and you're in the open ocean, you can transmit anywhere in the open ocean using your USA call sign. And I suppose that's true for aircraft too, I imagine. I don't want to get off on a tangent here, but I knew guys in the Air Force that would have do ham contacts on long flights. And I suppose as long as you were not over a nation's territory, you could do that. Do you know, Joe?
Yeah, that is the case. I made ham radio contacts actually within the continental United States, but also in international waters.
Okay. So it's the same for an aircraft or
Or ship.
yeah. Okay, I think,
Yeah.
yeah, that's it. Okay.
Okay, Steve, I'm going to steal the screen back. And can everybody see my screen again? I hope.
I can see it.
Okay, very good. Thanks. Okay, now we're going to talk about control. Control, just like it sounds, is the actual operating or controlling of a ham radio station. An amateur station may never transmit without a control operator. Now, some of you may be familiar with the concept of repeaters or automated stations. There are caveats associated with this, but there is always an assumption that there is a responsible individual acting as the control operator for those sites. In other words, they just can't be allowed to run free without any oversight, or I should say, any responsibility. So an amateur station, once again, can never transmit without a control operator. That's kind of wording you'll see in a test. Any amateur whose license privileges allows them to transmit on the satellite uplink frequency may be the control operator of a station communicating through an amateur satellite or space station. Wow, what the heck are they talking about there? Well, satellites, and that's a satellite antenna, by the way, right over there, have an uplink and a downlink. The uplink is a signal you are transmitting on. As long as you are legal to transmit on that frequency going up, you can operate on that station, even if the downlink, the received signal, is outside bands that you are authorized to be in. So think about this in the context of you are transmitting. If you're transmitting up to the satellite, you have to have privileges on that particular segment, but you can listen on any band you want. And that's true across the entire ham radio spectrum. In the slides I send you, you'll see a thing in there for Kiwi SWR, and it'll allow you to listen to broadcasts throughout the ham radio spectrum and things of that sort. You can do that. Ham radio is wide open. It's transmitting is the key thing. The station licensee must designate the control operator. Okay, so let's say you came over to my shack and visited me here, and you were going to be the control operator. I must designate you as so, and I do take certain responsibilities whenever I do that. And the same thing goes, for instance, let's see you as a technician. If I came over to your house to operate your transmitter, you must grant me permission, and it's strictly a verbal thing. It's not like it has to be written down and a letter goes to the FCC or anything like that, but you have to give me approval to go ahead and use your equipment or use your station. When the control operator is not the station licensee, the control operator and the station licensee are responsible for the proper operation of the station. So there's none of this like, hey, you invited somebody over to your station and they started interfering with people all over the place. The station licensee has responsibilities associated with that as well. But of course, whoever was operating the station does too. So it's a shared responsibility. The class of the operator license held by the control operator determines the transmitting privileges of an amateur station. So again, using that story where you as a technician, if I came over to your house to operate your radio, I can operate on any frequency in the ham radio spectrum I want to. The flip side of that coin is, let's say you were going to house sit for me over here at my station while I was out of town. But I said, hey, if you want to, you can go ahead and use my station. In that particular case, though, you're restricted to the license that you have. Under normal circumstances, a technician class licensee at no time may be the control operator of a station operating in an extra class band segment. Technically, that is true, but here's the caveat to that. If I was to go over to your house once again and we were operating your station, if I am supervising you, technically I am the control operator, but I could allow you to operate in any frequency segment you want. So if you wanted to jump on 20 meters or 40 meters and operate phone, as long as I'm there and I take the responsibility of the control operator, you can do that. So there's a little bit of, they're being really restrictive with that definition. That is true. You as a technician can't be the control operator. But if an amateur extra is with you at your station and is supervising you, you can do that. Now, here's another caveat to that. Let's say I come over to your house, I get you set up on an extra frequency or something like that, and I got to go run to the store to run an errand. That's out of there. I have to be there physically supervising. If I go somewhere else, then once again, you go back to being the control operator.
Question for you, sir.
Beg your pardon?
I got a question on that.
Sure, go ahead.
All right, so you're over at my house. Say, okay, you can get on 20-meter band, even though I'm a technician license only. At that point, will I use your call sign or will I use my call sign?
You would be, if you're operating on the amateur extra frequencies, you would be using my call sign.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. This, by the way, that's a picture of Gordon West himself there. He's the man. He's done a lot for ham radio, got a lot of people through their license exams. The location at which the control operator function is performed is the amateur station control point. This is also kind of a little bit of legalese. So in the case there in the picture, the control point is the location that control operator is operating at. That's kind of just one of those things that you almost got to just kind of commit to memory and know. It's part of the bureaucratic languages, if you will, associated with ham radio. Repeater operation, I talked about that before. That's an example of automatic control. A station is operating automatically, and that's perfectly legitimate. But again, there does have to be a designee who is responsible for the proper function of that system. Operating a station over the internet is an example of remote control as defined by Part 97. And that's a really cool thing because right here on my phone, I happen to have an app. I wish I had brought it up earlier. I'll tell you what, when Steve's talking, I'll go ahead and bring it up. But literally, I can operate off of repeaters using my phone. So let's say I forgot to bring my my walkie-talkie somewhere, my handheld, but I wanted to talk to Steve on our local repeater. I could just use my phone. That's another neat thing in ham radio. And that's considered an example of remote control as defined in Part 97. Part 97, by the way, is the set of rules that control ham radio for the FCC. So what are true about remote control operations? The control operator must be at the control point. A control operator is required at all times. The control operator indirectly manipulates the control. Oh, I'm sorry. They're flashing up things for the question. I apologize. In this particular case there, those bullets there are reference to the question about what is true about remote control operation. And the answer to that is all of these choices are correct. That is question T1E09. I'm not quite sure why they threw that in there in bullet format, but they tripped me up on that. Good on them. Unless documentation to the contrary is in the station records, the FCC presumes the station licensee is the control operator of an amateur radio station. So that is one thing that is true. You know, I told you didn't have to send a letter to anybody, but in ham radio, you do have to make log entries. So if you are operating as a control operator at somebody else's station, it is a good idea to just put an annotation in this, it's a little bit of CYA, but just an annotation in the log is more than sufficient to say that somebody else was the control operator. A control operator of an amateur station may receive compensation for operating that station when the communication is incidental to classroom instruction at an educational institution. That was the caveat that I told you about making money in ham radio. Here you can see a situation, and I'll assume that these folks are like at a school or something like that, maybe giving a class or something like that. Now, in a case like that, it is legal for a club or something like that to charge you for a course like that. You know, it'd usually be some nominal type of cost. Well, let's say they charged you $10 to come in and be there for a class. If they made radio communications where they were demonstrating the use of ham radio, that is perfectly legit. They can do that. So that is the one caveat of a way that you could technically maybe make some money with ham radio, but you can see it's a very narrow lane. The control operator of the originating station is accountable should a repeater inadvertently retransmit communications that violates the FCC rules. That's what I was talking about before. Even a repeater, it's out there running, you know, on its own. It's a computer operated machine. It still has to have a control operator, and the proper function of that is the responsibility of its control operator. And they can be technically accountable if they retransmitted communications that violates the FCC rules. Okay. That was the end of the control section. Steve, I did try to pick up the pace a little bit on this one here. We're an hour and 20 minutes into the session. So if possible, if you can pick up the pace, that would be wonderful. But back over to you.
Okay. Okay, you got to stop sharing here, Joe. Okay.
Yep, just got it.
Let's see. Now we talk about minding the rules here. Oh, come on. Select a window. What the heck? Here we go. Okay.
There you go, Steve.
Thank you. Now, minding the rules. And there are some things, these are common sense, but minding the rules, transmission of language that may be considered indecent or obscene is absolutely prohibited. That's common sense. No swear words, no filthy talk. Keep it clean. At no time is intentional interference to other amateur radio stations ever permitted. Guys get fined and they lose their licenses for that, but there are some screwballs that will do that, but that is not ever permitted, intentional interference. And transmission intended for reception by the general public is called broadcasting in the FCC rules, and you can't transmit directly to the public, and even playing music on your station is deemed as broadcasting. You're not allowed to do that. Now, amateur stations may engage in one-way transmissions intended for reception only by hams, and for example, like when transmitting code practice or information bulletins or transmissions needed for emergency communications. You can do, under some circumstances, one-way transmissions that are intended for other hams. And assuming no other means is available, ham stations are authorized to transmit signals related to broadcasting, program production, or news gathering, but only when such communications directly relate to the immediate safety of human life or protection of property. So when you're talking about human life or protection of property, the rules relax, and it's you do what you got to do. Now, you're not allowed to hide the meaning of your license. Transmission of codes or ciphers that hide the meaning of a message is allowed by an amateur station only when you're commanding a spacecraft or a radio control craft. Then you can encrypt what you're sending, only when you're sending commands to space stations or radio control airplanes or craft. Now, the only time an amateur station is authorized to transmit music is when it's incidental to an authorized retransmission of manned spacecraft communications. So, for example, if an astronaut here is playing the guitar on the space station and our repeater is rebroadcasting that signal, and the repeater at some NASA sites do that, then, but the key word is incidental. Only if it's incidental. You can't just up and broadcast music. But when it's part of something else that you are allowed to do, then yeah, it's okay. Amateur operators may use their stations to notify other amateurs of the availability of equipment for sale or trade when the equipment is normally used in a ham station, and such activity is occasional but not on a regular basis. So now and then on a net, if you have something to sell, you're going to, you can do that. I'm going to use the word ham instead of amateur radio operators. I think it gets me through this faster. So you can occasionally talk about stuff that's offered for sale, but not on a regular basis. Your station license must make the station and its records available for FCC inspection anytime requested by an FCC representative for any number of reasons. You may be unwittingly interfering with another service, so they can knock on your door and they want to see your log and your records. Also about your electromagnetic safety, that's a different thing, but your station records. So the FCC can ask for that anytime. Revocation of a station license or suspension of the operator license can be the result of the FCC being unable to reach you by email. So in the ULS, you got to make sure that email is good. And if you change your email, you better change it on ULS or the state FCC. If they can't reach you, they can pull your license, your operator or your station license. Now, revocation of the station license or suspension of the operator license is possible when correspondence from the FCC is returned as undeliverable because the grantee failed to provide the correct email address. I wonder if that's not a typo. Joe, can you check T1C07? Because your mail address has to be correct too. But this says the same thing as the first one. If your email bounces, your station and operator license can get suspended.
Yeah, that's T1CO2.
T1C07.
T1C07. Okay, here's the official ruling. Okay. Which of the following can result in revocation of the station license or suspension of the operator license? The answer to this out of the question bank is B, and that is the failure to provide and maintain a correct email address with the FCC. So that is correct, Steve.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Now I think we get into the question pool, so I'm done here. Are there any questions or discussion? Okay.
Okay, I will steal it back there, Steve. And can you see my can you see my screen again?
Yes.
Okay, sounds good. I was hoping to turn off the animations this time, but I don't know if it happened, so we will see. Nope, apparently not. Okay, let's talk about tech frequencies. The abbreviation RF refers to radio frequency signals of all type. So, and that's a very, very common term. You know, when you're doing some work or something like that, if you've got some interference, the term RF is just one of those go-to terms that refers to radio signals or radio frequency. The two components of a radio wave are electric and magnetic. And there's a slide in here that shows some neat things about that. But you can see here that the electromagnetic waves in this depiction here are going along vertically. Parallel to them is a magnetic field. And so a radio wave consists of both of them. It deals with both electric and magnetic fields. The relationship between electric and magnetic fields is that they are at right angles. Yeah, just like I mentioned before. In a subsequent slide, they're going to show you something called the right-hand rule. No, I'm not depicting myself as a loser. This is actually a rule that a methodology that engineers use to keep track of the magnetic and electrical fields. So a radio wave travels through free space at the speed of light. And again, you can see that hand on the slide there. That's showing the right-hand rule. The electric field is going in the direction of the thumb. The magnetic field is going, in this particular case, up vertical, and the direction of the wave is perpendicular to that. And they've got a depiction here that's a little complicated to see on this slide here, but once again, it shows the change in direction. Now over here, this is kind of interesting, the radiation pattern of radio waves around an antenna. Yeah, you know what? For a vertical antenna, that is a pretty good analogy to draw. If you were to have a vertical antenna, like the one on my handy talkie here, and imagine this sort of sticking up through the water in that pool, the way that the radio waves emit around it are basically a perfect circle, kind of like the same thing of reaching in there with your finger and tapping the water in a still, pan of water or something like that. So the approximate velocity of a radio wave as it travels through free space is 300 million meters per second. That's the number you just want to go ahead and commit to memory, 300 million. It also equates to 186,000 miles per second. But the one you want to remember again is this one here, 300 million meters per second. Frequency is the term used to describe the number of times per second that an alternating current makes a complete cycle. So in this particular case here, if we start from the 0 point on this low frequency wave, the wave goes up, it goes down like a roller coaster and comes up. That is one complete cycle. The period is the time that takes for that cycle to happen. And that is measured in that would be measured in seconds, that period, or fractions of a second more accurately. And the unit that is used to represent the number of times this alternates in a second is hertz. 1,000 hertz is abbreviated KHZ, and that is the proper abbreviation for kilohertz. Now, the way they're going to trick you, do take a look at the way that abbreviation is written. Lowercase k, capital H, small z. Believe it or not, in the exam, one of the answers is going to be a capital K, capital H, small z. So again, this is one of those things you just got to kind of commit to memory and know this is the proper abbreviation for kilohertz. And just to make it annoying, the one for megahertz is capital M, capital H, small z. Again, just something that you got to commit to memory. I do believe that those are kind of bogus test questions, but that's just Joe McGuire talking. So another way of presenting hertz is that depending on what forum you're in or how you're describing something, you may describe frequency in either kilohertz, megahertz, or for that matter, gigahertz, if you're talking about things that are operating in microwave frequencies. But for instance, 3,525 kilohertz is equal to 3.525 megahertz. So a megahertz is 1,000 times more than a kilohertz. The way that you would go from megahertz to kilohertz is you would divide the kilohertz by 1,000. Make sense to everybody? Okay. The property of radio waves is often used to identify the different frequency bands, and it's called the approximate wavelength in meters. And that is a very, very common thing in ham radio. You'll hear us refer to 80 meters, even 75 meters, 40 meters. Here we go, getting up into the VH range, 2 meters. And so that's a very common way to refer to segments of a frequency. The wavelength of a radio wave has a relationship to its frequency in that as wavelength gets shorter, frequency goes up. And the way to think of that is that, I talked about the period of a wave right now. If you take a wave and its period is getting smaller and smaller, that means within the time of a second, more alternations of current are happening. So it is inversely proportional to its wavelength. The low end of the ham radio band, or where the more popular bands, is 160 meters. That's down around 1.8 megahertz. Then when you come up to the VHF frequencies and things like that, you get into the hundreds and even thousands of megahertz, much higher frequency. So again, the relationship you want to remember is as the wavelength gets longer, the frequency goes down, inversely proportional. The formula for converting frequency to the approximate wavelength in meters is the frequency in megahertz equals 300 divided by the wavelength in meters. This is just, again, a memory thing, and you'll have opportunities to memorize this. But yeah, this is just a rule of thumb thing there. Frequency in megahertz equals 300 divided by the wavelength as expressed in meters. Or the wavelength equals 300 divided by the frequency. And that's just, a different way of presenting equations that have the same variables, but come up with pulling different answers out of the same formula. Okay, make sense to everybody? Okay, high frequency, called HF, extends from 3 to 30 megahertz. This is kind of the heart of the shortwave band for ham radio operations. That's where most of the activity happens. And this is where you'll hear about bands like 80 meters, 40 meters, and it extends all the way down to the 10-meter band. The 10-meter band is a very popular band for technicians because you can operate sideband on it. And right now we're in a great deal of sunspot activity, and it's a really fun band to play in because using a very simple station with not a whole lot of power, you can communicate all over the world. It's a really neat, fun band. And that's from 3 to 30 megahertz is HF. The maximum peak envelope power output for a technician class operators using their assigned portion on the HF bands is 200 watts. That shouldn't be a problem for you. Most ham radio transceivers that you buy commercially put out about 100 watts. And so, but as a technician on the HF bands, you can operate up to 200 watts. The very high frequency band is called VHF, and that extends from 30, just above the HF band, up to 300 megahertz. Again, just some numbers you got to memorize. VHF, 30 to 300. And this is where you will find a lot of your walkie-talkie 2-meter FM operations falls in that band. 2 meters is at 144 megahertz. And then the ultra-high frequency, or UHF range, extends from 300 up to 3,000 megahertz, or, by the way, that is also 3 gigahertz. Gigahertz is billions of cycles per second. And by the way, in this depiction here, they talk about some of the things that you'll find in that band. You've heard of UHF TV, television, land mobile, trunked phones, and cellular phone. There isn't even some cellular phone operation. I don't think there's much any. Well, let me think about that. Oh, I take that back. No, yeah, that is where you would find your cell phones as well. 1,500 watts peak envelope power output is the absolute maximum allowable power for any class of amateur radio station and for technician class operators using frequencies above 30 megahertz. So above 30 megahertz, you remember below 30 megahertz, you're restricted to 200 watts. Above, you can go up to 1,500 watts. Trust me, it's probably never going to happen. That is a ton of power. Actually, you might see it on 6 meters or something like that, but 1,500 watts is crazy power. I have never operated at using that kind of power before, but you can use up to 1,500 watts above 30 megahertz. One of the questions in your tests asks about a particular frequency. It's a little bit goofy, but this is a question in the test. 52.525 megahertz is within the 6-meter band. You know, I talked about before about converting frequency to band in meters. This is just kind of an exercise in that equation right there. But no kidding, this is the answer to one of the questions that is in the test. 52.525 megahertz is within the 6-meter band. 146.52 megahertz is within the 2-meter band. And what's significant about 146.52 is that this is the national simplex calling frequency for the 2-meter band. You'll hear ham radios operators refer to it as 5.2 direct. And if you just want to talk line of sight to somebody, let's say Bill, Steve, and I were all in the same general area with our handy talkies, we might go to a frequency like 146.52 to talk, rather than tie up a repeater. Oh, well, what do you know? The national calling frequency for FM simplex operation in the 2-meter band is 146.52. So kind of two ways of saying the same thing. Hopefully you'll get both of those questions on your exam. That'll be 2 easy questions for you. Now here's some goofy stuff. This is really kind of a corner case, but again, it's one of the things you got to know. There are limitations for emissions on frequencies between 219 and 220 megahertz that are limited for point-to-point fixed digital messaging forwarding systems only. This is a restriction. This is a very, very narrow band of operation. You're probably not going to experience this as a ham radio operator, but this may be a question as you're doing your question bank things that comes up. If you can remember this one, terrific. If not, I wouldn't worry too much about it. But again, there are some limitations for emissions between those frequencies of 219 and 220 megahertz. A band plan is a voluntary guideline for using different modes or activities within an amateur band beyond the privileges established by the FCC. The ARRL has a band plan. If you go to their website and go in the search bar and type in band plan, it'll bring you up the ARRL's band plans for frequencies all over the place. The reason they have them is because what they're trying to do is show people particular frequencies where particular types of operations happen. And the idea is to keep us from stepping on each other and also to allow people to know where to go. Like, for instance, if you want to do digital operations on 20 meters, it tells you what frequencies to go look for. But those things are called a band plan, and those are voluntary. They're just guidelines, voluntary guidelines, often set up by large organizations like the ARRL, but you will find them locally as well. Local amateur radio societies often set these up for communications within their general area. But again, they're strictly voluntary. If you do something different, it's not against the rules. U.S. amateurs may find non-amateur radio stations in restricted segments of bands where amateur radio service is secondary and must avoid interfering with them. Yeah, you cannot go, like for instance, within some of our bands, you will find broadcasts and other kinds of transmissions. U.S. rules don't apply all over the world, so you'll have foreign language broadcasts, things of that sort. And it is our job not to interfere with them. So, you know, just the same way you wouldn't go interfere with another ham radio operator's broadcast, you wouldn't do that with like a foreign language broadcast or something like that. It is not a good practice to set your transmit frequency to be at the exact edge of an amateur radio band or subband. Like, for instance, the lower end of the band for 40 meters is 7 megahertz. You wouldn't want to broadcast exactly at 7 megahertz. And the reason being is that you want to allow for the calibration error in your transmitter. Your transmitter isn't going to be perfectly on a given frequency. Also, your transmitted frequency creates modulation sidebands that extend beyond the frequency. And also, your transmitter may drift a little bit. So the reason why you don't want to do that exactly on the edge of an amateur band or subband is all of these answers are correct. Your transmitter may not be perfectly on. Modulation has a bandwidth to it. You may spill over, and your frequency might drift a little bit over time. especially if you're using older equipment, by the way. Okay, that's tech frequencies. You ready to take it back, Steve?
Yes, I'm ready. Okay, let's talk about your first radio. Shiny object. I like that cartoon. That's funny. That's why we go to Hamfest to drool over stuff. You'll hear some common controls on a radio. The push to talk function switches between receive and transmit, and it's called PTT. It's a button on the side of a handy talkie. It can also be a button on a microphone, but it's called push to talk. You can also store frequencies in a memory channel of your radio to get quick access. And you can go to memory mode, turn the dial, and you can go immediately to frequencies like for repeaters in your area. So you can store frequencies in memory to transmit, push to talk, to listen, you lift up on the button. There is an antenna. These small antennas have wire wound around them, and the idea is to make them small enough so that the little handy talkie and its antenna are manageable. These are called rubber duck antennas. They don't transmit as effectively as a full-size antenna. It is a compromise, but it's a good one. It allows you to transmit, although the efficiency is way down. That is the disadvantage of rubber duck antennas. They are inefficient. They work, but they're inefficient. Now, if you're trying to use your handy talkie inside the car, the body of the car also blocks your signal. It's better to use an antenna outside of the car. You may have heard of the term Faraday cage, and your car starts to act like a Faraday cage when you're talking inside the car with your handy talkie. So the idea is the rubber duck antenna is inefficient, but it works. And if you're using it in the car, that'll work too, but your signal will be attenuated. Now, modern handheld transceivers have amazing capabilities that we have a lot of fun with. They're really quite remarkable. For a low power handheld transceiver, these used to be called walkie-talkies in World War II. Now they're called handy talkies or HTs, but it's also a handheld transceiver is what it is. A transceiver is something that transmits or receives. And if it's handheld, we call it an HT. You can add a power amplifier to it to boost the signal level. For VHF and UHF repeaters, the most common modulation used is FM, frequency modulation. Modulation means putting information on the signal. If I modulate my voice, you can tell if I'm angry or happy or whatever by the way I speak. That's modulation. Now, here's an example of some modulated signals. The approximate bandwidth of a VHF repeater voice signal or FM phone signal is 10 to 15 kilohertz. That's a number you should memorize. The bandwidth of your signal going through the repeater on VHF is 10 to 15 kilohertz. And the most common type of modulation used for VHF packet transmission is FM. That's a digital transmission. Let's look at this diagram for a minute. Here is information that you want to put on the signal. And this is what goes in the microphone. If you put an oscilloscope like on the microphone, you'll see a voice signal here. Or for a digital signal, you'll see a two-level signal. Now, inside the radio, the transmitter produces a radio wave of a constant frequency called the carrier. So the input to the signal modulates the carrier, and this is what comes out the antenna. So you can see for amplitude. Amplitude is the height of a wave, or the distance from the axis to the peak of the wave. Amplitude modulation means that the amplitude or the height of the wave varies according to the modulating signal. Here you can see is a modulation peak, and so the modulation, the signal is greater here. And here is a modulation, a negative going null, and the result is a smaller signal. Now, FM, the carrier level is constant, but the frequency varies according to the frequency of the modulating wave. And digital modulation, you can see there's either one of two possible patterns in the signal, depending if you're trying to transmit a 1 or a 0. By the way, if you were to draw a line through the tip of all of these signals, that's called the envelope. Okay, you heard peak envelope power. That means anywhere in the modulation envelope, the instantaneous peak power cannot exceed 200 watts. That's what peak envelope power means. Okay, we get to the question pool. So are there any questions on this? Okay, there you go.
Okay, thank you much, Steve. Okay, we're on to the last section here. I hope everybody's hanging in there with us. Okay, and once again, Steve, if you can confirm that you can see my screen.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, also going to be moving fairly quickly, but I think we're doing okay for time. I know it may have seemed like we're a little bit rushed tonight, but that's because we were doing the intros and everything. Next week, hopefully, we'll have a smoother cadence. Okay, going solo, your first amateur radio station. A keypad or VFO, variable frequency oscillator knob, can be used to enter a transceiver's operating frequency. Like in the case of most handheld radios, that'll come on some type of a keypad, and you'll punch in the numbers like here, 146.8, and you'll punch them in. Now, on more modern transceivers, and by the way, this is a Kenwood TS2000 sweet rig, and we actually use these. Our club does for our field day activities. So come on out and you'll get to play with one of these bad boys. It's a real nice radio. You can see here that it does have a keypad on it. You could conceivably go in and punch in 14.2 megahertz in this particular case, or you can use the VFO knob. If you know precisely the frequency you want to go to, the keypad is great. The VFO knob is good if you have to adjust things around to get right on the frequency of the person that you're trying to talk to. A squelch kills the receiver's white noise when there's no incoming signal. So like that's more common on your VHF and UHF radios, you know, and you may have heard it like on a CB or something like that. It just gets that static out of the way in the background. Now, sometimes you do have to break the squelch to hear the signal coming in, you know, if somebody's really faint. But yeah, that's what the function of a squelch is it kills the receiver white noise when there's no incoming signal. And how you do that is you adjust the squelch so that the weak FM signal can be heard. Adjust the squelch so that a weak FM signal can be heard. The squelch threshold should be set so that the receiver audio output is on all the time. It also mutes the receiver output noise when no signal is being received. Okay, that's a tad bit of word salad there describing it. But yeah, again, you want to adjust it. You don't want to turn up the squelch so high that, you know, if somebody's coming in faintly, it won't break the squelch, is kind of what they're talking about there. A network of repeaters in which signals repeated by one repeater are transmitted by all the other repeaters in the network describes a linked repeater network. This is a pretty cool concept. To be honest with you, I have never used one of these before. But using a system like this, you could hit one particular repeater station, and a repeater is a receiver that a station that picks up your signal and then simultaneously rebroadcasts it, usually at higher power and greater distances. And this is a concept where you could have several repeaters over a large geographic area, potentially even over an entire state, and your transmitted signal would be rebroadcast again. So it takes a little radio like this, which typically has a range that's just limited to line of sight, And suddenly now you can cover tremendous distances with it. Simplex communications, and I mentioned that earlier, is the term used to describe an amateur station that is transmitting and receiving on the same frequency. And that is considered to be, that's your proverbial point-to-point communications. You can see here the two cars, they're communicating directly with each other. Stations within range of each other can communicate with simplex channels designated in the VHF and UHF band plans. Once again, those band plans I talked about before. They can do that without tying up a repeater. This depiction down here may be a little bit tough to see in your screen, but here you see a guy walking around and he's talking to his buddy in a car on 146.52, the VHF, the 2-meter simplex frequency. But if they were further away, here he is, he's hitting a repeater. The signal is then rebroadcast by the repeater, and he can go much greater distance. And that method is called duplex. Duplex. That's when you're utilizing two different frequencies to accomplish your communication. Simplex is when you're only using one. When an amateur operator makes an on-air transmission to test equipment, antenna, properly identify the transmitting station. This is something I do a lot, and actually Steve's big into modifying antennas as well. But if I'm tuning up my antenna, I am supposed to identify myself. I just can't put out a signal there and be cavalier about it and not identify the station that it's coming from. And you can do that a couple of different ways. You can do it with Morse code, for instance, or you can do it with voice on single sideband. This is WA1ZZQ testing. That's as simple as it gets. The procedural signal CQ means calling any station. Again, that's how we get in touch with each other very commonly, especially on the shortwave bands. We call out CQ, CQ. This is WA1ZZQ calling CQ. It sounds literally just like that. And if somebody else heard me, like Bill, he'd come back with something like WA1ZZQ. This is W3OS. And that's how you start a conversation. The guidelines when choosing an operating frequency for calling CQ are: first, listen. Listen on the frequency for a little while. See if anybody's operating it. Especially on shortwave frequencies, you may only be hearing one side of the conversation. Sometimes when you're listening on shortwave, you'll hear one guy coming in like gangbusters, and he's talking to some guy, thousands of miles away. You hear him really good, but you won't necessarily hear the other guy. As a matter of fact, that's probably more common than not, especially on shortwave frequencies. So the first thing you want to do is listen on the frequency for a little bit. Then you want to ask if the frequency is in use. The way that I might do that is say QRZ. QRZ is, are you calling me, or who is calling me? QRZ, this is WA1ZZQ. Is this frequency in use? Just like that. If someone's using the frequency, they'll come back with something like WA1ZZQ, this is W3OS. Yes, we're using this frequency for a net. Roger that, thank you. I'll go somewhere else. And also, of course, make sure you're in your assigned band. That happens. I've done it before by accident. You think you're tuning around, finding a clear frequency, and before you know it, you find yourself in a segment you're not supposed to be in. But it happens, but do be careful about it. That is perhaps one of the few things that can get you in trouble. But just make sure you're in your assigned band. And for this particular question here, this is a question right out of the test. All of these choices are correct. That is the answer to it. When responding to a station calling CQ, transmit the other station's call sign followed by your own. So again, when Bill was calling me back, he would call WA1ZZQ. This is W3OS. That's how you respond. Distortion of a signal's audio is the result of tuning an FM receiver above or below the signal's frequency. Yeah, that's a very common thing you'll find. If you're on an FM receiver and it's coming in distorted, it's probably because you're either not, you're not right on the frequency. You might be a few kilohertz off. An appropriate way to call another station on a repeater, if you don't know the other station's call sign, is to say the station's call sign and then identify with your call sign. The appropriate way to call another station on a repeater if you know the other station's call. So again, once again, if I'm calling Bill on a repeater, the way that I'd reach out to him is I would say, W3OS, this is WA1ZZQ. And if Bill hears me, he would then respond. VHF signal strengths sometimes vary greatly when the antenna is moved only a few feet due to multi-path propagation, canceling, or reinforcing signals. That is something that is very common with VHF signals because they are susceptible to like nearby metal objects or being in buildings or something like that. So if you're using something like my handheld here and somebody can't hear you, literally sometimes by just walking a few feet away, they'll be able to hear you again.
Just like with your cell phone signal.
Yeah, exactly. Just like that. The rapid fluttering sound sometimes heard from mobile stations that are moving while transmitting is called picket fencing. That's a fluttering sound, and that is called picket fencing. And believe it or not, there's a question on the test about it. So when two stations transmitting on the same frequency interfere with each other, no one has absolute right to an amateur frequencies. The station should negotiate continued use of the frequency. And that's one of the reasons why you want to call out first and find out if anybody's using the frequency. If somebody's on there, usually whoever's there first has dibs on it. But if you find yourself in a situation where two people are just bumping into each other, it's like, hey, we're all friends here. Just negotiate, move a few kilohertz apart, and everybody will be happy. QRM is a term, and this comes from Morse code day, is a Q signal, and there's a whole bunch of them. You heard me say the term QRZ, there's QRM, QSO. You'll learn these as time goes on, don't worry about it. But this one in particular, QRM, is the Q signal that indicates you're receiving interference from another station. So again, I'm going to pick on Bill a little bit there. Let's say we were both on a shortwave frequency and Bill was very close by and I was trying to talk to Steve. I might say something on the radio that to the effect of, I've got QRM from another station. In other words, I've got interference. And folks, we are running a little bit long. I appreciate you hanging with us. We're very close to the end though. We're doing pretty good. QSY is the Q signal that indicates you're changing frequency. So if I say I'm going to QSY to 14.15 megahertz, it means I'm going to change my frequency over to that. And again, these Q codes they date back to the days of Morse code. It was a short way of abbreviating actions that we did, but they have carried over into voice conversation and ham radio as well. So QSY indicates you're changing frequency. A popular activity that involves contacting as many stations as possible during a specific period of time is called contesting. And that is sort of like it's funny, the ARRL says that field day isn't a contest. Well, it really is, because you want to go out and contact as many stations as you can. And yeah, it's a very, very popular activity. There is some kind of contest test going on virtually every single weekend. They have just become huge in ham radio. When contacting another station in a radio contact, a good procedure is to send only the minimum information needed for proper identification and the contest exchange. Contests will have some type of exchange of information that you got to pass to the other person. Sometimes it's just your name and your location. It might be your call sign and your Maidenhead grid square. We'll talk about them in a little bit. But when you're doing a contest, yeah, it's good practice to only pass that information, because contesters get really serious about this. They want to make contact with you, get the information, and then move on to the next person. It's nothing personal. It's just how contests work. Okay, this is a Maidenhead grid location map. And if you Google that, you'll find a lot of websites that can help you with it. By the way, here in the greater Hagerstown area, we are in FM 19. I don't know if you can make out the letters in this, but where we are, it's kind of all messed up there because we're in a narrow portion of Maryland. But our Maidenhead 4-digit grid locator is FM 19. I'm in North Hagerstown. The 6-digit Maidenhead locator for where I am is FM 19DQ. But a grid location is a letter number designator designed to a geographic location. These are very, very popular, especially in digital communications. Digital communications uses these extensively. Okay, that was going solo. I apologize. I did kind of crank through that kind of quickly. Does anybody have any questions about anything I just covered? Does anybody have any questions about anything we talked about tonight at all? Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody who's on the call tonight. You are on the right path. I know that this was kind of a fire hose effect. Please do try to take some time to do some studying on your own. If you are interested in one of these technician manuals, I will send out an email with some of the slides that I briefed at the very beginning of the class. I'll send those off to you. You can reply to that email. Let me know if you want one of these. I did get 5 of them. Like I said, I got to keep a couple of these for the club. But what I'll try to do is try to get a head count such that if people want me to buy these in bulk next time, you know, maybe I can go out and buy 10 or something like that. But please let me know. Yeah,
Joe,
yes, sir.
Mark Evans sends a message that do you have everybody have students muted? Mark says, I think you have us muted, which is why you're not hearing anything.
Yeah. This is
okay. I apologize. I thought you would be able to come off mute without being a problem. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing.
I think you can. This is Walt. Can you hear me? I unmuted myself.
Yeah, you can do it yourself. I apologize. I hope people weren't trying to talk to me just then and couldn't do it, but you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, you can. Are you going to email these slides to us, sir?
Well, here's kind of the deal. Unfortunately, the ones we used here for instruction, we cannot forward you them because of the rights associated with the slides.
Okay.
However, we are going to post this video to YouTube, so you can see this presentation on YouTube, and I will let you know where the link for that is and everything. I'm going to have to download this recording off the cloud and get it uploaded to YouTube. I will try to get that done by this weekend because I am going out of town next week. We do have another class next week. I will be out on the West Coast. I am hoping my work schedule will allow me to be on it, but otherwise, Bill and Steve will soldier on without me.
Okay, thanks a lot, y'all.
Okay, thank you all. You're on the right path. Please do studying on your own, attend these sessions, and CramFest will be a piece of cake for you.
All right, very good job, Steve. Good job, Joe.
Thank you, Bill.
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now. Everybody have a wonderful evening. Take care, and we'll see you next week.